By day 4 of complete silence, some people start hearing voices that aren't there. Not because they're going crazy, because their brain is running out of something it needs just as badly as food or water, another mind to talk to. Most people assume being alone for a few days is no big deal, maybe even relaxing. Researchers who study extreme isolation, from solitary confinement to solo sailing to weeks-long cave expeditions, keep finding the exact same pattern. The first day or two actually does feel good, a break from the noise. But somewhere around day 3 or 4, something shifts, and it shifts fast, in a way most people don't expect until they've lived through it themselves. Psychologists studying inmates in extended solitary confinement found measurable changes in cognitive function after just a few days: trouble concentrating, disrupted sleep, a mental fog people struggle to even describe. Some researchers have argued that the psychological effects of prolonged isolation can resemble certain symptoms typically linked to sensory deprivation, even though nothing is actually being blocked. No blindfold, no earplugs, just no other mind to interact with. Some of the more extreme prolonged cases have been documented to resemble a kind of isolation-induced psychosis, though that typically requires isolation far beyond anything a normal person would ever experience. Here's the part that surprises most people. The brain doesn't just miss conversation the way it misses entertainment. Neuroimaging studies have found that social exclusion activates the same brain regions involved in processing actual physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same region that lights up when you stub your toe. In one well-known experiment, people played a simple ball-tossing game online, and when the other players started leaving them out, their brain scans showed pain-related activity almost instantly. It was just a video game with strangers, with nothing real on the line. The brain didn't care. It reacted like something had actually hurt. Some researchers who ran this experiment have suggested this overlap isn't a coincidence, that social pain may have essentially borrowed the brain's existing pain detection system over the course of human evolution, rather than building a completely separate one from scratch. So everyone assumes isolation is mostly a mood problem. You feel a little sad, a little bored, and that's it. That's the part that turns out to be wrong. Cave researchers who voluntarily spent weeks completely alone underground, no daylight, no contact, purely for scientific study, found something stranger than sadness. Their sense of time itself started to break. Days felt shorter or longer than they actually were. Some lost track of what day it was entirely, misjudging elapsed time by several days in some cases. Time, it turns out, isn't tracked by your body alone. It's partly maintained by shared schedules and conversations with other people, meals, routines, small check-ins. Take all of that away, and the brain's internal clock starts to drift, almost like an unmoored boat with no anchor point left. And then there's the self-talk. Solo sailors and Antarctic researchers who've spent extended periods completely alone report talking out loud to themselves, not out of confusion, but almost as a way to keep their brain's language and social processing systems from going completely idle. Some describe it becoming more structured the longer the isolation goes on, narrating their own actions, asking themselves questions, answering themselves back. A full two-person conversation, somehow running on just one mind. There's also a measurable physical cost that goes beyond mood or thinking. Chronic loneliness and prolonged isolation have been linked across multiple long-term studies to elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep patterns, and even changes in immune function. Some researchers have compared the long-term health risks of chronic social isolation to those of smoking or obesity, a comparison that reportedly surprised even the researchers who first proposed it, given how differently people tend to think about physical health versus social health. That research has grown enough in recent years that several countries now treat loneliness as a measurable public health risk, not just an emotional state. Not everyone breaks down the same way, though. Some long-term isolation researchers report the opposite after the first hard week, a strange, almost meditative clarity. Psychologists now describe isolation as having two distinct phases: an acute stress phase in the first several days, marked by restlessness and scattered focus, followed by an adaptation phase where people can feel surprisingly calm, even sharper in certain ways, once the initial shock wears off and the brain settles into a new rhythm. But here's the twist inside the twist. Researchers are careful to point out that adapting isn't the same as thriving. Even during that calm phase, cognitive testing still shows measurable drops in specific skills, verbal fluency, short-term memory, especially the longer the isolation drags on without a clear end date. People report feeling fine. Their brain, measured directly, isn't quite keeping up with what they're reporting. That gap between how isolated people say they feel and what the tests actually show keeps showing up again and again across completely different isolation settings. There's a reason it hits this hard in the first place. For most of human history, being separated from the group wasn't just lonely, it was dangerous. Less protection, less access to food, less warning about threats nearby. Some researchers argue that the discomfort of isolation works exactly like hunger or thirst, an alarm system built by evolution to drag a person back toward the group before things get genuinely dangerous. Under that view, loneliness isn't some modern inconvenience. It's an ancient survival mechanism that never really got the memo that physical solitude doesn't carry the same life or death stakes it used to. There's a modern twist on top of all that old biology, too. Some researchers studying isolation today point out that a person can be technically surrounded by people, a packed city, a busy office, a full house, and still show many of the same physiological markers of isolation if none of those interactions actually go anywhere deep. That's led some psychologists to draw a line between simple aloneness, which the brain tolerates just fine in short bursts, and a felt sense of disconnection, which seems to be what actually sets off the stronger alarm, no matter how many people happen to be standing nearby. So the next time a few days without real conversation feels heavier than it should, that's not weakness talking. That's a very old alarm system doing exactly the job it evolved to do, treating a lack of connection as seriously as a lack of food or water. Who's the first person you'd call if you went a week without talking to anyone? If this made you want to actually call them, hit subscribe. There are plenty more strange questions waiting.